Morning. It's Monday, which means you're all here. Well, most of you are here, even though we thought we might have a snow day. Um, so this is the last set of slides for the biochemistry unit. This should be watched for Wednesday, March 21st, 23rd. And then next week we'll be having a very short test on this content. Um, and then we will move on. We're actually going to be talking about cells and organelles next. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is Gibbs free energy, which is hopefully something that you learned in chemistry a little bit, and maybe in physics as well. So there's two states of energy that you hopefully remember from physics and from chemistry. Potential energy, which is stored energy, and kinetic energy is active energy or the energy of movement. Energy is the availability to do work. That's the physics and the chem definition of what energy is. We have some laws of thermodynamics that we have talked about before. If you remember back to our ecology unit when we talked about, hi, and I'm back. So first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed. It gets transformed from one form to another. So like heat energy versus movement energy versus what other types of energy? Like chemical energy, electrical, stuff like that. There's different forms. The second law of thermodynamics states that as energy conversions occurs, some of the usable energy is converted into unusable energy in the form of heat energy. We call that entropy. Heat energy can do work, but only if there is a heat gradient. So anytime we have an energy conversion, so for an example, in a car, we're using chemical energy because gasoline has bonds in it that break, that create energy that fuels our car. Its output is mechanical energy, which is the physical movement, but also unusable heat energy. That heat energy radiates out into the atmosphere and it is not used. Basically, it's only 25% usable energy, 75% unusable energy. And so whenever we look at a process, we look at how much is usable, how much is unusable, and that determines the efficiency of something. So when we talk about high efficiency, if you ever see like high efficiency labels on your washing machine, that is created so that it loses less energy as heat. Because if you ever felt like a washer or a dryer creates a lot of heat that's being lost. Free energy is the energy that is available to do work. The amount of free energy in a system is always lower than the total energy of a system. This is because every time a process happens, we are creating some sort of unusable energy. So let's say when our system started, we had 100% usable energy. We started doing some sort of processes, and some of them were still usable energy, but we always lose a little bit to the point where we end up with 100% unusable energy. But that's in a closed system, and if we remember, the planet is not technically a closed system. Things are coming in, right? Sun, and therefore thermal energy is coming in as we are losing thermal energy out through the atmosphere. When we talk about the second law of thermodynamics, which is that we always create some usable and some unusable energy, over time in a closed system, there's a decrease in the amount of free energy available to do work. And as a result, the entropy of the system will continue to increase. So the heat energy or the unusable amount of energy. This will continue until the system exhausts itself of any free energy supply, which is why we require on our planet an open system to allow more free energy to come in as we are basically using up our usable energy. As free energy decreases, so usable energy decreases, there's an increase in the disorder of a system. It takes free energy to maintain the system's order. Entropy is the measure of that disorder. Basically, it is saying that as I increase heat or as I increase the not usable energy, then I also increase the disorder of my system because free energy is the usable type, which maintains order. Entropy, the measure of heat or the measure of unusable energy, is basically also the measure of disorder. So increase in disorder, increase in heat, increase in unusable energy. All of those correlate. When we talk about this when we look at it when it relates to biology as opposed to physics, we know that all organisms need that free energy, which is usable, to live, to reproduce, to grow. We get it by eating. Autotrophs, which we talked about back in the first unit, rely on sun or radiant energy, whereas heterotrophs rely on the food they consume. So they don't get that primary source of food all the time. This is how organisms obey the first and second law. You don't need to worry about this video. So when we think about how chemistry and biology relate, we know that in a chemical reaction, bonds are broken and they're made. The chemical energy of the reactants will be different from the energy of the products, right? We know that I either am putting energy in or I'm taking energy out of a reaction. And hopefully you're thinking like, oh, exothermic, endothermic reactions. Hopefully you're thinking that. Maybe you did a reaction with a calorimeter. It's like using a foam cup and like measuring the amount of energy lost. Maybe you remember that. There's a couple other terms about energy. If we mix 2 moles of hydrogen gas with 1 mole of oxygen gas, nothing happens, right? I'm trying to make water, hypothetically. If I add a spark, so if I like zap it, the following reaction happens. The hydrogen plus the oxygen reacts to create water. And my change in energy, or delta G, is going to be negative 58 kilocalories. Basically, it's saying that in order for water to be made by hydrogen and oxygen, I have to basically break apart my oxygens and hydrogens to like free up the electrons and allow them to bond in the H2O manner, as opposed to, right, because it's not H2O2, it's H2O. And so that extra energy, or the energy of activation that allows the reaction to happen, breaks apart the oxygens. This also, think of it as like being on a roller coaster or something like that. Basically, I have all of my reactants and they are moving up towards the very peak of a roller coaster. Only when I hit, or when I supply that bolt of energy, do I rush down my roller coaster, or does my reaction happen. We call it the energy of activation, which is the amount of energy needed to basically push it over its tipping point. So when we talk about these reactions, we know that energies or bonds hold energy. This is the combustion of methane gas. Methane gas is CH4, and if I combine it with oxygen, it's going to combust and create water and carbon dioxide. If we look on the left side of the slide, the bonds break first and they absorb energy. Technically, that is not an exothermic, endothermic reaction. They're absorbing energy to separate them. When the bonds are made and energy is released, we have our exothermic, which is why we have a combustion reaction, or like the release of a lot of heat and fire when it comes to combustion, is because it is releasing 814 kilocalories per mole of energy. So if you remember talking in chemistry about if a reaction is exothermic or endothermic, when we look, we see that the beginning of this was endothermic, the end is exothermic. But we need to look at the net energy. So I took 624, which was the energy that it took in, and I looked at the energy that it put out, and we see that I'm putting out more energy than I'm taking in, therefore it's an exothermic reaction. And we can also always tell that combustion reactions are exothermic because they are outputting a ton of energy, or fire. So if we look at exothermic versus endothermic reactions, a decrease in enthalpy or a decrease in your like if you have a reaction that is producing energy, either fire or heat, it is said to be exothermic. Burning of wood is exothermic. Um, an increase in enthalpy is said to be an endothermic reaction. Basically, it is absorbing heat, and you may have remembered this where you like touched a glass and it became cold. Photosynthesis is considered endothermic, so it's not a heating process necessarily. Um, Changes in energy can be calculated by a reaction called Gibbs free energy, and we're actually going to talk about that in class. But we can look at the changes in energy, or delta G, is the energy that is at the end, the final energy from the reaction, and the initial energy from the reaction. And it essentially allows us to calculate, is this an exergonic or endergonic or exothermic and endothermic reaction? When we talk about this, when it comes to biology, we look at ATP specifically, because we know that breaking down ATP into ADP is actually how we get energy in biology. Specifically, we lose a phosphate, so it goes from ATP to ADP, and we're producing some sort of energy. When we talk about like other reactions that happen in biology, some examples, besides just breaking down ATP, are what we call coupling reactions. So there are certain reactions that happen in our body, but only when they're coupled with ATP are they going to release a large amount of energy. So instead of just saying, oh, we break down ATP, it's actually these other processes that are happening in our body. So if we see the triangles are glucose, glucose breaking down in the presence of ATP is actually what causes the huge release in energy that we need to do things. Also, photosynthesis is going to be another like coupled reaction, a reaction that actually requires more than one thing to happen. And so we call it a coupled reaction. Photosynthesis is endergonic. Basically, it is absorbing a bunch of energy, right, which is why it's taking in the sun, and it outputs a chemical energy in the form of glucose that can be used, but it's not putting out heat, whereas cell respiration is exothermic. It produces heat as well as breaks down glucose. When we talk about coupling reactions, it can get super complicated. Metabolism is the sum of all of the biochemical reactions. So any reaction that is coupled with ATP breaking down totals our metabolism. I'm going to pause here and switch so that you don't get cut off. These slides are almost done, probably 5 more minutes, and we should be good.